All right, well, thanks so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate your time.
Great to be here. Thank
so
you.
the Log4J vulnerability became public just about a week ago. What do you guys know now that we didn't know last week?
Yeah. So first off, I should say that the Log4J vulnerability is the most serious vulnerability that I have seen in my decades-long career. Yeah, and three reasons why. Ubiquity, simplicity, and complexity. So it is a piece of software, open source, that's in millions of devices, from video games to hospital equipment to industrial control systems to cloud services. It is trivial to exploit as a vulnerability. Essentially 12 characters, and a remote unauthenticated attacker can take over a system, can use it for stealing data, can use it for ransomware attacks, all manner of malicious activity. And it takes a very focused effort to be able to find and to fix the vulnerability, because it's open source, so it is in all manner of vendor products. And so what we have done, we've been a full court press effort since last Friday. When this was publicly revealed, we've been working with our partners all across technology. In particular, we use what's called a newly created entity, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the JCDC, which is 20 of the largest global technology companies, cloud service providers, internet service providers, cybersecurity vendors, infrastructure backbone that have visibility into the threat environment. So we've been working with them to figure out what are the products that are vulnerable to Log4J, and what we can do to take steps to mitigate this vulnerability. But I'll tell you, Eamon, everyone should assume that they are exposed and vulnerable, and to check and make sure that they're not vulnerable.
So we've seen a lot of scrambling, a lot of panic about this. What we haven't seen are a lot of attacks necessarily, linked to high-profile names. Are those attacks still coming, or do you think companies have been pretty effective so far in tamping down the danger here?
Well, we've had a full court press effort to make sure that people understand what they need to do to identify and to mitigate this vulnerability. But my view is we are going to see widespread exploitation by all manner of threat actors, and likely impacts on both public and private infrastructure. We're doing everything we can with our partners to get ahead of that. But we're going to be dealing with this vulnerability, Eamon, for a very long time. This is not something that is going to be patched and finished. This is something that we're going to be working on likely for months, if not years, just given the ubiquity of the software and the ease of exploitation.
So what have you seen so far from the bad guys? I mean, criminal hackers, nation states, are they probing? Are they actually hacking? Have they gotten into anything that you're concerned about right now?
So far it's been low-level activity like crypto miners hacking for compute power. Our partners have seen all manner of threat actors, to include nation states, looking to do exploitation. Again, what I expect to see is more widespread exploitation in the coming months and really days and weeks, and that is why we have a full court press effort. I'll tell you, this is something that CISA was built for. This is why we were established at the end of 2018 to be the nation's cyber defense agency, and to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the digital infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. So we are at the center of gravity, working with our partners on the cyber defense effort to ensure we understand the threat, we know what threat actors are going to do, and we can take actionable steps to mitigate the exposure to this very serious vulnerability.
So Mandiant says they've seen Chinese threat actors involved in Log4J vulnerabilities, probing, looking for weaknesses. Can you confirm that? Is that what the U.S. government is seeing as well?
I have seen that reporting. Mandiant is one of our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, JCDC partner. None of this surprises me. Again, this is a vulnerability that is trivial to exploit. So, of course, all threat actors, from cyber criminals to nation states, I expect them to look to take advantage of this vulnerability.
But just to be clear, from the U.S. government's perspective, are you seeing the Chinese taking advantage of this vulnerability now?
We're working with our partners to ensure that we understand all that the threat actors are going to do. So we don't do attribution at CISA. That's not our job. We have great teammates that are very focused on what we're seeing in all of the other spaces. But what we do is cyber defense, and that's why I have the best job in government, because I get to wake up in the morning and be the nation's cyber defender along with all of our partners across industry at the state and local level.
So where did this vulnerability come from, right? I mean, the story that's out there so far is that this open source software existed for a long time. In 2013, somebody added a feature that allowed you to send a malicious URL to it. How did that happen? And then how did nobody notice it for nearly a decade?
Yeah. So open source software is ubiquitous among devices all the time. We have seen these types of vulnerabilities come up. You probably remember the Heartbleed vulnerability. So this has been in devices, and people have not paid attention to the fact that it was trivial to exploit. That became publicly known or publicly revealed on Friday. In terms of the backstory, I expect some of that to come out in the days and weeks. That is not our focus area. Our focus area is understanding what we need to do to mitigate the impact of this vulnerability and prevent widespread exploitation and attacks across all manner of infrastructure.
Let's stay on sort of the backstory though for a second, because it's this huge vulnerability that affects everybody in the world, and so people are curious, how did this happen? Do you know who had their fingers on the keyboard in programming that code and what their intent was?
I don't.
So you don't know if this was an intentional vulnerability that was put into open source software, or this is just an accident on the scale of like Y2K?
We don't know that yet. Again, there's a lot of work being done, not in my agency, to understand. But this is something that everybody should be concerned about, not because of where it came from, but because this is incredibly dangerous to everybody's business, everybody's networks, everybody's system. And we really need to be focused on what we need to do to mitigate the risk of this vulnerability being exploited in a very widespread way.
So if you're the CEO or an executive at a corporation anywhere in the United States or around the world, what should you be doing right now to make sure that your company is not vulnerable to this? Because this software is everywhere.
It is everywhere.
And a lot of companies are saying, hey, wait, we have to wait for our vendors to patch. We don't know necessarily where it is. It's extraordinarily complicated, and we don't have as much control as we'd like to over the process of dealing with this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's why we've been working full out with our partners as soon as we found out about the vulnerability. So we've done a few things to help business leaders and their security teams and their information technology teams know what to do. So first, we have published a dedicated web page that has all the information in a one-stop shop way, so you can find out what's the nature of the threat, what threat actors are doing, and very importantly, mitigation guidance. We've also published a website on GitHub, the largest software development platform in the world, working with our technology partners and with some amazing security researchers that list all of the vulnerable products. So it's very important that you have some place to go to be able to say, are we exposed and what do we need to do about it? Is there a patch, or do we need to put in place some sort of mitigating set of controls? So we've been working arm in arm, really shoulder to shoulder with our technology partners to help us understand what is the nature of that threat and what do we need to do working together to drive down that risk at scale. The other thing that we've been doing is ensuring public awareness about this, because it can sound very complicated. How does this whole thing work? It's in all kinds of software. What do I do about it? So we really want to help people understand what it is and what to do about it. So we convened our stakeholders across critical infrastructure the other day. We had almost 8,000 of them to make sure that they understood what they needed to do, and we've been working directly with all of our partners to continually update information to ensure they have the guidance they need.
What are you seeing from corporate America so far? Are they responding effectively, or are they not taking this seriously enough this week?
I think they are taking it seriously, and I will tell you, they need to take it seriously. Because doors are open. If you have not confirmed that you're not exposed, you absolutely need to press in and make sure that you are fully focused on this. But I'll tell you, Eamon, this is not just the only thing we're concerned about. Yes, Log4j, but if you look at the rest of the environment, we're going into the holiday period that is historically a place where threat actors take advantage of the perception that people are taking time off. We have cyber defenders
and the hackers work holidays. Right?
Exactly. We have cyber defenders that frankly are a bit fatigued and burned out after all of the past year. And as you know, we have a lot of geopolitical complications and challenges out there. And so we issued an advisory to CEOs and business leaders yesterday to do 3 fundamental things to prepare for this environment. The first is to ensure that you have staff on call to be able to surge if you have an event, an incident. The second is to make sure.
So you have to have people working over Christmas, over New Year's, all the holidays.
You have to be prepared. You have to have a surge plan because you may have to bring people in to protect your business. The second thing, you have to prepare for your incident response plan. You have to know what to do, who to call, how to work with the federal government, how to work with your partners. You have to be able to plan and prepare in peacetime for resilience to be ready for when there's a major attack. And then finally, to reduce your thresholds for information sharing. If you see suspicious activity, if you think you've been hacked, you need to report it to CISA or our FBI colleagues to enable us to render assistance to you and to use that information to be able to protect others. That's why I was a little disappointed that we didn't get cyber incident reporting legislation into the NDAA, but I'm very hopeful that our congressional leadership will be able to get it in to law here in the coming days or weeks. It's incredibly important so that we have an aperture on what is the threat environment, and really so we can use our extensive information authorities that have liability protection, that has privacy protection, to be able to warn others so they don't become victims as well.
We only have a little bit more time, so I want to wrap up by going back to where we started, which was on LOG4J, which is the thing that's on everybody's mind this week. As you've looked at that vulnerability just over the past week, I mean, less than a week that it's been public, what surprised you about what you've learned so far?
I think when I first heard about it, I didn't have an appreciation for those three things that I said. Ubiquity, hundreds of millions of devices. Simplicity, 12 characters to exploit this vulnerability. And complexity, not because it's difficult to patch, but because it's in so many different products and devices, you have to be able to find and fix each. And having spent time in finance, it's not trivial to say patch something. Actually, it can be very complicated when you have to schedule patches because you don't want patching to interfere with operations. But I would say to every business leader out there, make this your top priority. Do not delay on ensuring that you are as protected as you possibly can be from this vulnerability.
What's that going to cost American companies? And can you put a dollar figure on the cost of all the remediation efforts that are going to go into this over the course of the next couple of months?
Not at hand, but I can tell you it will likely be less than if you fall victim to an attack that uses the Log4j vulnerability and you lose your business, you lose your reputation, you have to spend months and months trying to remediate the threat. So that's why everybody should get ahead of this vulnerability and do everything they can to mitigate the risk.
That's a great place to leave it. Why don't we stop there? Thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Absolutely. Great to be here.